He lied about a worthless stock, made millions, and served just 22 months in jail. Not years, not decades, 22 months. That sentence alone should make you uncomfortable, because this isn't just a story about a criminal getting lucky, it's about a system that rewards manipulation, forgives fraud, and converts crime into capital. Jordan Belfort didn't break capitalism, he exposed it. And once you stop looking at him as the villain and start looking at what worked, you realize this isn't a movie about excess or ego, it's a case study in how persuasion beats value, speed beats oversight, and why the people who bend the rules often end up teaching them.
If this were really about Jordan Belfort, the story would end with his arrest. But it doesn't, because Jordan isn't the interesting part. He wasn't a mastermind, and he wasn't an anomaly. He was a stress test, a loud, reckless demonstration of what the system rewards when persuasion, profit, and speed collide. What matters isn't who he was, but what worked. Sales culture learned that confidence beats truth. Firms learned that closers matter more than compliance. Regulators learned that oversight arrives after the damage is done. And capital learned something even more dangerous, that crime with upside and capped punishment is still a rational bet. That's why this isn't a morality tale. It's a case study in incentives. Because once a system rewards a behavior, it doesn't matter who performs it. The behavior spreads, scales, and eventually looks normal. The first thing the system rewarded wasn't fraud. It was selling confidence. Long before stocks, Jordan was already learning the same lesson over and over. The product barely mattered. Lemon ice, meat, penny stocks, different markets, same result. What scaled wasn't value, insight, or honesty. It was the ability to sound certain. And that's the uncomfortable reveal here. Markets don't pay for truth. They pay for conviction. If you can make someone feel like they're early, special, and smart, the details fade fast. This is why the escalation worked so smoothly. Each step wasn't a moral leap. It was a technical improvement in persuasion. Once confidence became the real commodity, the door was open to sell anything, to anyone, as long as the pitch felt airtight.
What made this so effective is that the persuasion didn't feel aggressive. It felt helpful. The pitch was never about understanding the company, it was about understanding the upside. You didn't need facts, you needed momentum. Urgency was manufactured, so hesitation felt like stupidity. Authority was implied, so doubt felt disrespectful. The language did the work quietly. This is moving fast. Smart money is already in. I wouldn't be calling you if this wasn't special. Nothing illegal on its own, nothing you could easily point to and say, that's the trick. And that's why it worked, because the manipulation wasn't framed as deception, it was framed as opportunity. By the time the listener realized they hadn't actually learned anything, the decision had already been made for them. What made this scale wasn't just persuasion, it was incentives stacked in the wrong direction. High commissions didn't just reward success, they rewired behavior. When the upside for closing was massive and the downside was someone else's problem, ethics became optional. Information was uneven by design. Brokers knew more, earlier, and selectively, and that gap wasn't a flaw, it was the business model. Losses were externalized to clients, while profits were internalized instantly. That's moral hazard in its purest form. In a system like that, fraud doesn't feel like a crime, it feels like optimization. When honesty pays less than conviction and punishment arrives late if it arrives at all, the rational move is to push harder, faster, and louder. The market didn't accidentally produce this behavior, it priced it in. Stratton Oakmont didn't just sell stocks, it manufactured belonging. That's how the system locked people in. The office wasn't run like a company, it was run like a fraternity, then a cult. Chaos wasn't a side effect, it was a feature. Drugs blurred judgment, public humiliation enforced conformity, rewards were loud, visual, and immediate. If you closed, you were celebrated. If you questioned anything, you were isolated. Over time, identity replaced ethics. You weren't just an employee, you were part of something special. And once your income, status, and self-worth are tied to a single environment, morality starts to feel like betrayal. This is how organizations remove the need for rules. They don't argue about right and wrong, they control who you belong to. By the time regulators entered the picture, the game was already over. That's not incompetence, it's structure. Oversight moves slowly because it has to. Evidence takes time. Jurisdiction takes time. Laws are written for yesterday's schemes, not tomorrow's incentives. Meanwhile, money moves in real time. Complexity becomes a shield. By the time something is clearly illegal, the profits have already been booked, distributed, and spent. This is why regulation always looks weak from the outside, not because rules don't exist, but because speed beats scrutiny. Illegality only matters once it's proven, and proof only arrives after damage. In a system like this, the smartest players don't avoid the law, they outrun it.
What finally protected all of this wasn't money, it was story. Once the operation collapsed, the narrative shifted before the consequences could settle. Memoirs reframed fraud as excess. Speaking tours reframed manipulation as motivation. Hollywood reframed crime as entertainment. The damage didn't disappear, it was repackaged. This is narrative laundering. When you control the story, you don't erase what happened, you change how it's remembered. The focus moves from victims to charisma, from mechanics to personality, from harm to spectacle. And once the public consumes the story as inspiration or cautionary fun, accountability softens. The system doesn't need to defend itself anymore. The audience does it for free. That's how a financial crime becomes a brand, and how reputation becomes a second, quieter form of immunity. For most of this story, the damage stays abstract. Numbers on a screen, trades gone wrong, money that just seems to vanish. That's not an accident. Systems like this survive by keeping victims invisible. But at the end, reality intrudes. It wasn't hedge funds or institutions eating the losses. It was a teacher who trusted a voice on the phone, a veteran who believed he was finally getting a break, a family that watched savings built over decades disappear in weeks. These weren't gamblers chasing thrills. They were people relying on the promise that markets are fair enough to participate in. And this is where the story turns uncomfortable, because once you see who actually paid the price, the spectacle collapses. The excess stops being entertaining. The charisma stops being impressive. What's left is a transfer of trust into profit, and a system that made that transfer not just possible, but routine. He didn't escape justice, he sold it. Prison became a chapter in a larger story, one he controlled. And that's the part that should make you uneasy, because the system didn't just allow it, it rewarded it. Fraud became experience, manipulation became sales mastery, harm became content. But here's the line most people don't want to cross. Maybe he got away with it because on some level, we wanted him to. We applauded the confidence, we admired the money, we laughed at the excess, we shared the clips. The system didn't just forgive him, it recognized something in us. And that's the real mechanism this story exposes. As long as success rewrites ethics and persuasion outruns accountability, this won't be a one-off scandal. It will be a repeating feature. Not because people like Jordan Belfort exist, but because we keep building systems where selling the illusion matters more than protecting the truth.